the MP. The Right Honourable is in the hot seat. Ask the MP with Farai on ZFM Stereo.
Very good evening to you. A warm welcome to Ask the MP. It's only on ZFM Stereo, my station, your station. Thank you so much for tuning in this Tuesday evening. If you are tuning in live from Harare, then you're obviously catching us on 106.4. But I want to remind you of all our other frequencies across Harare, across Zimbabwe rather. Kama TV Wange 105.1, Byte Bridge 106.1, Gweru, the City of Progress 104.3, Chivu 99.8. Kariba 105.3, Masvingo 96.1, Kadoma 105.2. I'll be reminding you of the others during the course of this program, but if you have family, friends, or people you know there, certainly tell them to tune into those frequencies right now, to tune into this program, which does belong to you as the listeners, because it is your opportunity to participate, to have your say, to contribute to the discussions that we have on this program. If you don't already know, Ask the MP comes to you every Tuesday. It is an effort where we bring in different members of parliament, portfolio committees of parliament, office bearers of parliament, as well as civic society organizations, and we tackle the most topical issues being discussed in parliament, and we give you an opportunity to get some insights on those issues. You can ask questions, get in touch with us, 0731 168 045. That's our WhatsApp number, 0731 168 045. But we do encourage you to give us a call. It's always much better to hear you in person. 0772 168 045. 0772 168 045. I look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible tonight. We are focusing on a meeting that was held between the Justice Parliamentary and Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament, which met with civil society organizations that have petitioned Parliament on electoral law reform issues. Now, the organizations that have petitioned the Parliament include, and this is in no particular order, the National Association of Societies for the Care of the Handicapped, NASCO. We have the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust, YET, Y-E-T-T, ICODISM, and also, that meeting was held with the United Citizens Alliance, as well as the electoral ERC, the Election Resource Center. Now, that meeting was organized by SAPST, and these organizations highlighted the need for electoral reforms and the demilitarization of the election's mother body, ZEC. In the studio tonight, we have two of the organizations that petitioned Parliament, and that will be what we'll be focusing on tonight. My guests, let me introduce them. None other than Honorable Fortune Chasi is a ZANU-PF legislator for Mazoe South. He also chairs that Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Legal Affairs. Thank you so much, sir, for coming through to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Alongside him, we have Darlington Muyambwa. He's the youth advisor for YET, Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust. Darlington, great to have you on the program. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, and good evening, listeners.
Last and by no means least, Mr. Farai Mungoni is the Executive Director of the National Association of Societies for the Care of the Handicapped, NASCO. Thank you for coming, Mr. Mungoni.
Thank you for having me, and good evening, listeners.
Once again, we want to hear from you. Get in touch with us, 0772 168 045 or 0731 168 045. Can I begin with you, Mr. Mungoni? This meeting that was held, could you just briefly give us an overview of, what was discussed?
Yes, it is a known fact that the hallmark of any democratic dispensation is the participation of marginalized groups, especially in electoral processes, so that they are given space to ventilate their concerns, needs and aspiration. But regrettably, the electoral landscape in Zimbabwe leaves a lot to be desired in terms of creating that space for persons with disabilities to participate fully and effectively. This is because of a number of a plethora of challenges, which include, but not limited to, inaccessibility of polling stations, because some polling stations are not accessible to some persons with disabilities, such as wheelchair users. And where they are, accessible, you find that the ablution facilities may not be accessible. ZEC personnel, which attends to voters, does not have a basic appreciation of sign language. So when a person with a hearing and speech impairment visits a polling station, no one attends to him or her, because no one can communicate in an accessible format. And also you find that persons with disabilities, for example, the electoral material, like voter education material, is not in accessible formats such as braille and sign language. And also some politicians, perhaps, who are contesting for political office, use hate language to discredit a person with a disability who is also contesting for political office, denigrating them on grounds of disability. So all these challenges, create an electoral landscape which is not even, and persons with disability continue to be relegated to the periphery of society. Yet they are the legitimate citizens of Zimbabwe, and no human being is discardable, and accordingly they must be treated as people with inherent dignity. But sadly, persons with disabilities are continue to be marginalized.
Indeed. Just a quick question. The registration exercise that is still ongoing, although the blitz has come to an end. How is that catered for people with disabilities?
Yes, it is disconcerting that some of the BVR stations were not accessible. So it scared away some persons with disabilities because they could not visit those centers. So ZEC is currently in a process of compiling statistics of how many persons with disabilities finally managed to register. But we note with very deep concern that despite several representations for several years, it seems that the services that are offered, by ZEC, leave a lot to be desired in terms of being fully responsive to the peculiar challenges faced by persons with disabilities.
There's no agency or priority.
There's no agency. Attending to the needs of persons with disability is not regarded as something that is a must-do thing. It is taken as something that is perhaps nice to do if time permits.
Let me bring in the other, organization that also attended this meeting that petitioned Parliament. This is the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust. The youth advisor, Darlington Muyambwa, is in the studio. Darlington, any other issues that you raised and brought to petition this committee? What were some of the issues that you are pushing or agitating for?
Thank you very much, Farai. So, as yet, we also submitted our petition to Parliament, which clearly outlined 4 key issues. And interestingly and importantly is the issue of people living with a disability that has already been raised by my colleague here. But the other issues that we also brought through the petition was one, the issue around strict requirements of acquisition of civic registration documents. Because this disproportionately disfranchised young people, especially those in rural areas. So there are young people who failed to register because there were no mobile registration centers in hard-to-reach areas, as well as the requirement for witnesses to witness birth registration documents for these young people. The other issue that we raised is the issue around media regulation, that there is need to ensure jurisdiction of media regulation, not only pre but also during the elections, to be under the fair and independent authority of the Zimbabwe Media Commission, so that there is balanced reportage, there is balanced coverage of all candidates that are participating in the elections, but more importantly, that there is access to information for the electorate. The third issue that we raised with Parliament was around the call for Parliament to be the vanguard of ensuring that there is freedom and fairness in this coming election. And this we call upon the issue and bring attention to the issue of violence that is associated with the elections in Zimbabwe. We call upon Parliament to ensure that there is increased punitive measures for actors encouraging and perpetuating politically motivated electoral violence, and also ensure that universal voter and civic education is at all stages and at all stages of the electoral cycle, so that people are informed adequately about electoral processes in the country. So these were the issues that we raised from a youth perspective, because they are the issues that have been affecting and that are currently affecting the effective participation of youth in electoral processes in the country.
Thank you so much, Darlington. Honorable Chasi, you were at this meeting, you heard all these concerns. Where to from here? What are you doing with your committee with regards to these issues?
Well, thank you very much. We had, I think, an excellent meeting. The colleagues here made very elaborate presentations, and one was left with very little doubt that as a country we have let down those amongst us with disabilities, and that we need to do a lot of work. So pursuant to our conclusion of that hearing, the committee is sitting next week on Monday at 2 p.m. to deliberate on the numerous representations that were made by the three organizations, I think 3 or 4 organizations that attended. But the good thing was that the chairperson of SEC was present, Justice Chigumba. And I must say that I was personally extremely impressed with their knowledge of ZEC issues, operational issues, the key issues that are of concern to the public, and her extreme willingness to engage everyone that was in the meeting and any other stakeholders that were outside. So after next Monday, we are going to be able to then present our report to Parliament and make specific recommendations. But it's very clear that the petitioners were really pushing an open door. It's very difficult to resist the issues that were raised as they pertain to elections.
Can they still be incorporated or pushed through some of these issues? Can they be addressed? Can they be part of the reforms that we'll see? Or perhaps it's a process that will say, okay, may not be able to do it now, but certainly take it into consideration going forward?
I think the misfortune is that we tend to attend to electoral issues very much close. Yes. So we need to be a bit more organized as a country around those issues, because the longer we take to implement the suggested reforms, the more people are prejudiced. I think that the most or the least that our Parliament can do is to emphasize to the executive as well as to ZEC on the need to expedite the very necessary and very clear, I think, recommendations that have been made by and large. But it's very difficult or impossible for me to specifically say that they will be implemented in time for the elections. We don't really have much time, and I think in some instances, some of the concerns, particularly ensuring that polling stations are accessible by somebody with a wheelchair, for example, or ensuring that voting papers are in Braille, I'm not quite certain that ZEC would be in a state of readiness to implement those issues and whether they are budgeted for. And I really think that after this election, there should be no excuse whatsoever to implement these suggested reforms.
Mr. Mungoni, not that is what will happen. Let me just put a disclaimer that what Honorable Chasi said is not, when they do meet and deliberate, perhaps those may not be the outcomes, but if there is a scenario where resources may not allow, logistics may not allow, that some of the issues you are pushing for be addressed, what then is the way forward in your view? What is your next course of action?
Yes, our view is that there should be no excuses for denying someone his or her democratic right. For example, if I can give you a case in point, is that relates to assisted voters, say, who are visually impaired. For example, they vote, one casts his or her vote in the presence of a presiding officer, a police officer, and a police officer who check whether the individual has been assisted correctly by his or her assistant. Now, $1 million question is how correct is correct, and this denies the assisted voter his or her constitutionally guaranteed right to vote in secrecy, and giving an excuse for lack of implementing such a fundamental right. I think as persons with disability, we frown upon such an excuse, because this is our democratic right. And also, some of the issues are purely administrative. For example, ensuring that persons with disabilities are represented in the commission, so that at the planning stage, at all stages of the electoral life cycle, we are there, we put our input, and also ensuring that even at secretariat level, persons with disabilities are represented. This can be replicated at provincial right through to the district levels. So for such administrative issues, I don't think it requires any kind of legislative intervention, because these are purely administrative issues. So as persons with disabilities, we strongly hold the view that we've been disenfranchised for too long, and until when should government continue to give excuses, making such prevarications, on issues that are unnegotiable.
Let me bring in our other guest here, representing the youth. How confident are you that, the issues that you have raised will be addressed? And perhaps you could also share with us your insights in terms of that meeting, how responsive was ZEC? Are you confident that indeed going forward, Darlington, the issues that the youth want to be addressed will be addressed, or if not addressed, at least they've been listened to and heard?
Thank you very much again, Farai. I think in terms of confidence, we are welcome to the idea of ZEC participating in these platforms, and also Parliament hearing us out in the petitions. But what's most important is the implementation of those issues that we have asked for. And as an organization and as youth, we are going to continuously monitor and demand for accountability over the issues that Parliament has received. So we are going to follow processes, due processes that are going to be done, including the debates and the discussions that are going to be held at Parliament level. But we are also going to push for quick wins, which we think are within reach and which do not require any, significant legislative reforms. And these quick wins for us is, for example, issues around access to media, issues around ensuring that there is platform for people to access and share information on electoral processes. Quick wins for us are also around issues of denouncing electoral-related violence that is ongoing. For us, this is within the conversations that have been ongoing of ensuring that we have a free, fair, and credible elections. And this benefits every stakeholder that is going to participate in this election. So we are going to push it all fronts, Parliament, ZEC itself, as well as political parties that are going to participate in these elections, because we think that they all have a stake to play in the management of these elections, and we all think that there are some quick wins that we can get without necessarily waiting for the long process of legislative reform.
Darlington, let me ask you this. You talk about election violence, you talk about access to media. What, in your view, what is it that you would want to constitute that you are now satisfied? Because as far as I know, ZEC has been on record saying no violence. We don't want violence. They've also been on record as saying, look, everyone should have access to the media, and perhaps we'll be able to see the violence or see the lack of access when we're actually in election mode. So at this stage where we're not in the election season, what is it that you would want to see that will give you satisfaction or comfort that the issues of violence have been addressed, or the issues of access to media have been addressed? Because they are there in writing, they are there on paper.
Yes, Farai. But most importantly, I think, as you would have also had access to in the media, there are cases of intimidation which has been ongoing in terms of, for example, people being asked for their voter slips without their willingness. And these cases for us are disturbing cases that we wouldn't want to see within the environment. And most importantly, electoral-related violence picks up as we get closer to the election itself, and as campaigning intensifies. This is the most critical a time that we want assurances that there will not be violence. So as young people, what we are asking for, and this is something that came out in a study that we did, that the voter apathy that we have experienced before in terms of young people that have a low number of young people that has participated in elections is related to their fear of intimidation and to violence that is associated with elections. So that is what then we think needs to be addressed moving forward if we are to see young people. And it's commendable that, for example, the ZEC chair indicated that about 60% of those that have registered to date are within the age group of 18 to 40. So this is very positive as far as we are concerned in having new and young voters. But these young voters will only vote on election day if the environment continues to be peaceful, if the environment continues to allow diversity in our engagements on issues to do with the elections. And then in terms of the media access that we have been talking about, we have got state-run or state-owned and state-controlled media in Zimbabwe. And this is the media platforms that we expect to provide coverage for all players, not only players, but also even for the electorate themselves, so that they share information and they discuss and engage and debate on issues like we are doing today around elections from different viewpoints in a free and balanced manner. Those are the asks that we think are our critical measures of whether these reforms or these suggestions that we have petitioned Parliament have to be followed.
Honorable Chasi, your quick responses to some of those issues?
Well, the first one on violence, it must be condemned in the strongest of terms. And this includes what happened in Buhera a few weeks, maybe 2 or so weeks ago, when Mr. Tsvangirai was being buried. Funerals of all places should be the most peaceful, unless one is in Sicily, in Italy. And all political parties, all stakeholders must speak very, very strongly against political violence. No selectivity in accusing. Now we know that political parties can be violent regardless of what they say in the public. That includes ZANU-PF, that includes MDC. All political parties must be censored in the very strongest of terms.
How easy will it be? I know you've got other points you want to make, but this is a discussion that I think many people have. And in fact, I was mentioning it to someone over the weekend where I'm saying that how easy will it be to change this mindset, this culture that's almost entrenched, where I know for some people, election simply means it's now war. So as much as at the highest levels you may say no to violence, some people just know it's automatic. It's them versus us, and we must beat them to a pulp.
Yes, that's a very important point. And as far as I'm concerned, it's about leadership. And I think that the president has sent the necessary signals to all Zimbabweans that what we want is free and fair,
transparent and credible elections. People simply have to understand that they must be tolerant of each other and respect the Constitution, but not only the national Constitution. Political parties must respect their own constitutions. That's where the problem starts. That's where the cheating starts. And so it's about leadership. It's also about the leadership of people at a local level, people like MPs, for example. When you speak to people that voted you into parliament, they will listen to you. If you send them to go and beat up others, they are going to do that. So MPs must be required to speak publicly and honestly against political violence. An election, by definition, is simply an expression of the free will of the people. Now, if they are coerced into taking positions that they don't believe in, then we're not engaging in an election. It's a farce. We're engaging in something else. So our new constitution, I think, is very clear, and it's giving us an opportunity to grow our democracy. It's a process. It's not an event.
Linked to, these groups that we have here are not the only ones who we know have issues that are outstanding. I've spoken to various organizations who say, look, there are a number of electoral laws that are still to be implemented, and so perhaps achieving this free and fair election may not be possible. We've got a listener who's gotten in touch and says, Honorable, how do you debunk the notion that all issues pertaining to electoral reforms which lower the chances of winning of the ruling party are not going to be implemented because those in power are not going to do something which kicks them out of power? So people, I think the term that's often used is no one will reform themselves out of power.
Well, I'm not going to pretend to be a prophet and to know what's going to happen in the future. But I think what we do need to do as Zimbabweans is to set out the framework that enables free, fair, and credible elections. And that really means that also there is a lot of work that we need to do in terms of confidence building measures, trust amongst political parties, trust between government and the citizenry. And every stakeholder has got to work on those issues that deplete the public's trust, whether it is real or imagined. Sometimes people can imagine things, but that's what influences their mind. And so if you're a political party or if you're a government, you've got to work on those issues to ensure that there is trust. I don't believe that we are in a situation where people will refuse a very clear defeat. And I think all of us must be prepared to accept the outcomes of the elections. And the president himself has said that the voice of the people is the voice of God. And I think there is a lot of sincerity in that.
Right. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, as persons with disabilities, we take very great exceptions when it comes to political violence, because political violence is disabling. When government is failing to provide for the needs and aspiration of the current population of persons with disabilities, and we want to add more, I think it is quite disturbing. And also, I think ensuring that we have a violence-free society, violence-free elections, I think this requires concerted effort. The chiefs, must play a key role in awareness raising. There has to be accelerated awareness raising amongst citizenry, and this should cascade downwards up to the village head to say we don't tolerate this. Zero tolerance of political violence. Of course, this may not change overnight, because changing of a mindset, it is not an event, rather it is a process. But would want the posture that the president and the entire government has taken in terms of condemning violence in its strongest terms. And so far, I think there are indicators that, political violence is going down, because around this the same time in previous years, we could be receiving, reports of horrendous acts of violence. But although we haven't achieved the maximum or the optimum levels of a violence-free society, but at least there are indications that we are moving somewhere.
Let me put it to both of the groups that are here. This is to you, Mr. Mungoni, as well as Darlington. We've seen in the press today stories relating to the number of military or ex-military personnel that are engaged by ZEC. Is this an issue that any of you raised or concerned about? What is your take on that?
My humble submission is that someone must not continue to be condemned in terms of his military background. Now, ex-military officers are free constitutionally to join any organization of their choice. It's like saying if someone is an ex-prisoner and has been rehabilitated and has reformed, he is not free to join any organization for fear that he will commit a criminal act. I think it's like stereotyping someone. I think to me that kind of argument, is kind of parochial. That person, can be reoriented, and that person is free to join a public service organization, is free to join a private sector organization without any discrimination whatsoever. Now, if we discriminate someone on the basis of having, a military background, I think it is ultra-vires. It is inconsistent with the spirit and letter of our constitution, which constitution I think government should, and all citizenry must endeavor to uphold.
Darlington, do you have any views that may differ to that?
Yeah, my views, or my view and that of our organization is that anyone, regardless of their background, should act professionally when they are in such bodies like ZEC, because they are very important in ensuring confidence that Honorable Chasi was talking about early. So we need conduct that is professional. We need conduct that ensures safety, professionalism, and this cuts across anyone in such bodies. Having said that, one of the issues that the youth sector have also raised is that there is need for ZEC to also engage young people as within the election, as personnel that leads and that interacts with the public within the election. Given our population, that we have a very youthful population in Zimbabwe, 70% of Zimbabweans are below the age of 35 according to statistics. So there is need then to also see faces that are familiar to you for young people, so that they feel that this process is not just a process of military personnel, it's not just a process of the elderly or the older generations, but it's a process that also involves them as stakeholders, not just leaving young people to be, the electorate or to campaign on behalf of other stakeholders, but also having them participate equally so and having opportunities to be part of the employees for ZEC.
At the risk of, and certainly no offense to young people, but again, for me, there's a sense of, we want this done for us. I'm sure as opportunities do come up, these things are things that youth can apply for. Have youths been perhaps sidelined or disenfranchised at all in this regard?
So, Farai, the issue is that, as you're saying, as these opportunities come up, but with young people, sometimes we need to also be sensitive over some of the barriers that exist within them. If you look at the unemployment rate in Zimbabwe, and also that young people are aching to find a living, if a newspaper advert is put for any post, let's not take it for granted that young people would have equal access to that newspaper article, because some of them are not even able to afford the newspaper. So what methods or what efforts have been done deliberately to reach out to young people? And that is why it is necessary in such bodies like ZEC sometimes to include a quota system that then makes it a deliberate strategy to ensure that there is inclusion of some sectors of our society that are obviously marginalized because of structural barriers, marginalized because of issues of access to resources. So this is the plea that we have as young people, that it has to be deliberate. It cannot be just to say it's equal for all, because we know there are some barriers that disallow other sectors of our society from accessing the same information that some are accessing, and from having the same opportunities that some sectors of society are having.
Brian in Bulawayo gets in touch with us and says, I'd like to add that violence doesn't mean fights, but also words spoken. Can our leaders, especially traditional chiefs, not use words like we won't allow a certain leader to let people decide for themselves? Another listener here saying free and fair has already failed. Look at ZBC. It's a ZANU-PF campaign wing. Other media, other state-owned media are worse. The president is all talk on media reforms now. Otherwise, why can't he say otherwise we can't say the elections are free and fair? What can ZEC do to ensure such things stop? ZEC not being here, I suppose we can just put it to Parliament to say, Honorable Chasi, what can you do to hold ZEC to account, to say, look, the law stipulates that there must be full access to media. The law stipulates that there must be voter education and awareness. What are you going to do to hold them or ensure that they do what they are meant to do as mandated by the Constitution?
Well, thank you very much. Let me start by commenting on the issue of soldiers at ZEC. And I want to say that we cannot have our cake and eat it. On the 15th of November, the ZNA was the darling of everybody in this country. They were very good people. People were taking selfies, people were hugging them, and even kissing them. So, really, I think to then try and turn around and then insist that these people are animals when they've retired from their jobs. Some have been soldiers for 40 or so years, if you include during the liberation struggle. What really is wrong with somebody who has resigned from the army and has moved into a commission such as ZEC?
When you use the example of those who've been in the service for a very long time, 40 plus years, war veterans who have been on record, or we've heard them calling themselves stockholders of not just members but stockholders of a particular political party, does that not then give credence to the concerns that people have that there's a risk, not that we talk about the professionalism that has been raised, that there's a risk that that vested interest may lead them perhaps not to discharge their duties as they should.
This is the exact point that my brother here was saying, that we're now profiling somebody as a soldier to say that they're not a good person. But they're the people who ensure that we have the security that we're experiencing here and now. I think that we need to focus on the individual. If somebody is misbehaving, it doesn't matter whether they are a soldier or not. They must simply be dealt with. ZEC must operate as an independent commission as contemplated by the Constitution. And of course, the place of soldiers, serving soldiers, is in the barracks. Or when there is an exigency of some sort, they are required to act in a certain manner. But I think to classify people and say that because they are soldiers, they shouldn't be in ZEC, I think that is erroneous. Now, coming to the second part that you asked me, Parliament will play its role, oversight role, over institutions of government in a very, very serious manner. And we intend to be following up on all the issues that have been raised without fear or favor. And when government doesn't act, we'll bring them to account. If we think that ZEC is not operating in accordance with the law, will similarly raise issues with them, and where necessary, ensure that appropriate action is taken to deal with individuals there that are not compliant.
Just to go back to, and I think it's important that we also, because you are here and can give us some of the insights that we may not necessarily have. We understand and we hear that, the point was made earlier by a listener that there is perhaps a reluctance on the part of lawmakers to implement and push through some of these reforms, that it becomes partisan, that certain parties are dragging their feet and don't want to see these things implemented. When you sit in Parliament, when these issues are raised, or have they been if they are raised, have they been raised before? What has been the stumbling block that has restricted the implementation of some of these reforms, if at all?
Well, I don't get the feel in Parliament that people are unwilling to implement the various reforms. Parliament will deal with a bill that has been presented to it. And I think on many occasions you can't distinguish who is in what party. I think we are in agreement that we need a cohesive electoral law that is well constituted before the election, so that every person, every stakeholder can plan knowing with certainty what the law provides. I don't get the feeling that there is anybody who doesn't want to implement the reforms. In fact, as a committee, we have insisted in our most recent report that we would like the legal framework for elections to be completed well in time, and we believe that government is really acting along those lines. It's just that as a nation and not as individuals or as parties, we leave these things at the end. So the moment we complete the forthcoming elections, we should need to begin to prepare. In all respects, the entire gamut of issues that affect the electoral process must be looked at and worked on. And I don't think that it's impossible. Our neighbors, our neighboring countries have been doing that. And I think the head of state has also made it very, very clear that that is what we should be able to do. And it's not only a desire, it's a necessity for the countries that we deal with outside. We have a legitimate interest in knowing how we are conducting ourselves, are also interested in knowing that we have a modern way of dealing with elections.
There's a point that you made earlier, Mr. Mungoni, and a listener reiterated it, well, maybe not, but brought it in a different way, where he says, violence is not just physical. It's also in the words that are spoken. Earlier you spoke about words or terms that denigrate, particularly people who are handicapped in different ways. Now, it's also something that concerns me about our politics in Zimbabwe, where we see a lot of, insulting is not the right word, but, people making fun of other people, using terms that make fun of other people, whether it's about age, whether it's about, all sorts of issues. So it becomes politics, so it's about ridiculing people who can make the most jokes about someone. And unfortunately, crowds seem to buy into that. They love that. And it's less about issues, but more about now, pulling down the other personality, ridiculing and making fun of the other personality.
Yes, it is quite regrettable that despite Zimbabwe being one of the first countries in coming up with the disability legislation, which is the Disabled Persons Act of 1992, we still lag far, far behind in terms of that. In terms of implementing such legislation. Someone jokingly put it that Zimbabwe suffers from a disease called implementitis, that is lack of implementing policies and laws. And what often happens in Zimbabwe is when a person with a disability, for example, tries to contest for political office, other rivals want to denigrate him using such terms. moda kuvhotera chirema. What has become of you people of Zimbabwe? You want to vote for a disabled person. So, and because of disability awareness in Zimbabwe is still very low, and government has not taken any decisive move on accelerated awareness raising of disability. You find that some people try to giggle, ridicule, and associate disability with incompetence, associate disability with incapacity. I can give an example that amongst persons with disabilities, we have got lawyers, we have, people who have PhDs in different disciplines. We have police analysts. Like in my situation, not that I want to brag about my achievement, despite the fact that I have a visual impairment. I hold 3 degrees and 2 diplomas, and I'm currently working on my doctoral thesis. When we went to school, I learned alongside persons without disability, so-called non-disabled, but I managed to outperform them. So use of hate language, like denigrating someone, on grounds of disabilities, should be legislated upon and must be prohibited. And whenever it happens, I think the law, such individuals must face the wrath of the law.
Listener contributions, thank you so much for getting in touch. I have a listener here saying the president has to walk the talk. He can't continue to preach for free and fair and credible elections without electoral reforms. Why can't we have a 100-day plan for these electoral reforms? Thank you so much for getting in touch with that question, with that contribution and indeed question. Here's one that's quite interesting, and it's clearly, I'm sure, from a young person here who's talking about the issue of, former soldiers. Says, why would a soldier who was gainfully employed for 20 years or more still get another job at ZEC, yet some of us have never been employed anywhere? That is from Simbarashi. Thank you so much for getting in touch. I want to come back to that issue, Honorable Chasi. It may not be directly what we're talking about here, but it sits with you because you are the politician amongst us. That, yes. When will we migrate from, we are asking the electorate to move from, violence and all these things. When will our politicians migrate from, this denigration, ridicule, making fun of the other people, and actually say what they are offering and putting on the table? Because we can only buy into jokes and attacks for so long. People want issues addressed.
Yes, I think that the question of hate language is a very, very serious matter, and as Mr. Mungoni is made clear, people with disability are extremely vulnerable. If somebody is visually impaired, they may not even be the target of a missile that is being thrown at a funeral, for example, to attack somebody. And it will hit them because they can't see it. So I think there is merit in the suggestion that he has made, that there is a need to actually begin to legislate against some of these things. It's very, very common on Twitter. You find people using foul language. It's unacceptable. They use foul language in English, which they cannot repeat in front of their family in vernacular. And so there is merit in dealing with those. But also, I think we now need to enhance the penalties against political violence in particular. And the communities must be able to hold their members of parliament to account. That's the first step of accountability. The communities themselves must be able to hold the politicians within their parties to account and question the use of improper language, which may be hateful or hateful to others, describing others in insulting terms and so forth. But there is a very strong need for discipline within the political formations. And particularly the prominent parties, must be able to take very swift and decisive action against those that engage in political violence, so that it's very clear to the public that this is unacceptable. Similarly, when these matters come before the courts, the sentencing must be exemplary, so that it's very clear. Members of parliament and other leaders must say to those that follow them that if you engage in political violence, I will not help you in any way. I will not look for a lawyer for you to defend you in court. That's your own problem, because I don't represent, neither do I want blood-stained votes.
Gwenzi Ngueru says the real issue is not about retired security personnel being animals, but the rationale of keeping jobs for them when some cannot have a sniff of a chance for a job their whole lives. Where is the fairness? Why not let those who retire to their homes? Are our elections going to be free and fair? If so, why is it our media, when it comes to party rallies, is only about ZANU-PF? Is ZANU-PF the only party contesting in 2018? Thank you so much, listeners who are getting in touch with those contributions. Please do keep them coming through. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear your contributions so we can, I suppose, build into this discussion. It's obviously very critical. Elections affect us all, and I hope that all of you have registered to vote. I want to bring you in, Darlington, as we head towards wrapping up. It's also incumbent upon organizations such as yourselves to educate, to raise awareness. Yes, ZEC has that role and that responsibility, but I'd love to know what you as an organization are also doing to educate, because perhaps some of these violations that, when you talk about violence and things like that, happen because people don't know that they're actually violating the electoral laws. So as an organization, are you doing anything? And if so, what are you doing to educate your constituents?
Okay, yeah. So as an organization, we are currently running a campaign called Ballot Buddies. And Ballot Buddies is a campaign that has got three main key characteristics. The first one is it's a campaign that was encouraging young people to register to vote and eventually vote come election. So it has had a mobilizing effect around registration throughout the Blitz period, and even currently on the ongoing process of encouraging young people to vote as citizens. The second stream is, as suggested by the name itself, Ballot Buddy. It's also around sharing information around the electoral process and the electoral system, so that people are not so scared about elections, as we have discussed earlier, that there is this cloud that seems to hang around, especially young people, on elections. We want to demystify that. We want to make it as simple and as clear as possible that elections are simply a free expression of the will of the people, and young people have to understand that. So we are building a new culture through Ballot Buddies, that elections are not scary. Elections are your responsibility as an active citizen of a country. The third aspect that Ballot Buddies is also doing is to play the advocacy role of engaging with Parliament, engaging with SEC, engaging with other electoral stakeholders to ensure that areas where there are issues and concerns are addressed as we build and as we improve the way we hold our elections. So those are the three main thrusts of that campaign. And we have another campaign which is called Youth Action 2018. It's also around the same idea of mobilizing and rallying young people to participate, advocating for aspects that needs to be reformed. But more importantly, we are trying to make sure that young people this time around vote and express their votes as citizens of the country.
We have a listener who says vanhu ngavasungwe nyangwe vakaita violence within their parties ndokuti tizive kuti you are serious. Thank you so much for that contribution. I will allow you, Honorable, to give your parting shots, because we're almost out of time, and then leave the final say on this program to our guest from NASCO. So, Honorable Chasi, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I want to conclude by reaffirming my earlier opening remarks to say that elections are the gateway to democracy. we must take them very, very seriously. We need all of us to work against violence and to ensure that when we conduct our elections, we allow everyone to express their own will. And that way, I think Zimbabwe will continue to rise. Allow me also to thank the Southern Africa Parliamentary Support Trust for always creating these forums for us to discuss such very important issues. Thank you very much.
And once again, when is your committee sitting to discuss the issues that were raised?
We are sitting on Monday at 2, and by the end of that meeting, we'll definitely have recommendations to Parliament. As soon as possible thereafter, we will be able to present our report to Parliament.
Very lastly, Mr. Mungoni.
Yes, when we clamor for electoral law reform, it does not only benefit those with disabilities now, because remember, everyone is potentially disabled. We drive every day. Not that I want to instill fear in the citizenry. We drive every day. We fall in love, and those are potentially disabling activities. So be warned. So conspiring against persons with disabilities or ignoring their needs and aspiration is ignoring against your needs tomorrow. So be warned.
Thank you so much. Honorable Fortune Chasi is a ZANU-PF legislator from Mazoe South. He also chairs the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Justice, Parliament and Legal Affairs. Thank you so much. Mr. Darlington Muyambwa, Youth Advisor, Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust, yet Mr. Farai Mungoni, very soon to be Dr. Mungoni, Executive Director, National Association of Societies for the Care of the Handicapped, NASCO. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming through to the program. Thank you so much to our listeners, and in particular those who got in touch with us. Ask the MP is only on ZFM Stereo, my station, your station. We bring you this effort every Tuesday. It's always great to hear you, get in touch with us, and that you are tuning in and listening to us. Up next, Health Matters with Larry. Do stay tuned to ZFM Stereo, my station, your station. It is everybody's station, and so we wish you a wonderful evening. Good night.